My name is Amina Sharif, and for 46 years, the fortress of my faith felt impenetrable. I was born and raised in the misty hills of Greenampton, Scotland, a world away from the ancestral lands of my Pakistani parents, yet the heart of my world was Islam. It was more than a religion, it was the very architecture of my reality. By every measure, my life was a testament to its blessings. I had built a successful career as a chartered accountant, a profession of numbers and logic that seemed to echo the clear, divine order of my faith. I had a loving husband, Rizwan, whose devotion mirrored my own, and three wonderful children who were the pride of our lives. But most importantly, I possessed what I believed was an unshakable, unwavering faith. The 5 daily prayers were the pillars of my day. Ramadan was a welcome recalibration of the soul, and the zakat I gave was not a duty but a joy. Rizwan and I had even completed the Hajj pilgrimage twice, standing shoulder to shoulder with millions, our hearts beating as one in the holy city of Mecca. In our local Muslim community, I was known for more than just my piety. I had a gift for reciting the Quran, my voice finding the melody in the sacred Arabic verses. And on weekends, I dedicated my time to teaching Islamic studies to the bright, eager faces of the children at our mosque. I would watch them, their small hands tracing the elegant script, and feel a profound sense of purpose. I wasn't just passing on rules. I was building the next generation of the faithful, fortifying the walls of our community against the secular tides. My life was a carefully constructed edifice of devotion, community, and certainty. I believed with every fiber of my being that I was walking the one true path, the Surat al-Mustaqim, the straight path to paradise. I saw my life as a reflection of divine favor, a well-tended garden thriving under the benevolent gaze of Allah. The thought that this entire structure, this fortress I had spent my entire life building and defending, could be razed to the ground in a matter of seconds was not just unthinkable, it was an impossibility. But even in the most formidable fortress, small hairline cracks can appear, almost invisible to the naked eye. Looking back, I can see them now, the whispers of doubt that I so expertly plastered over with prayer and pious activity. They were quiet, insidious questions that surfaced only in the dead of night, after the children were asleep and the house was still. I would lie awake, listening to Rizwan's steady breathing and wonder about the sheer, unyielding borders of Allah's mercy. I thought of my colleague, Elinor, a kind, gentle soul who spent her weekends volunteering at an animal shelter and caring for her elderly mother. According to the doctrine I taught with such confidence, her goodness was dust in the wind, meaningless because she had not accepted the Shahada. Was she truly destined for an eternity in hellfire simply for being born into the wrong family, the wrong country? I would push the thought away, labeling it a waswas, a devilish whisper from Satan, and recite a surah for protection. The argument with my younger sister, Mina, had been another crack, larger and more difficult to ignore. She had always been the more inquisitive one, the one who read history books that weren't on the approved list. She had called me a few weeks before the accident, her voice strained. Amina, have you ever actually read about the raids on the Meccan caravans? Not the version we were taught, but the historical accounts, or about Aisha's age. I had cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. That is the propaganda of Orientalists, Mina. They twist our history to poison us against our faith. You need to strengthen your man, not fill your head with lies. We ended the call on a cold note, and a bitter unease settled in my heart. I was angry with her, but beneath the anger was a tremor of fear. Fear that her questions might validate my own. The most persistent whisper, however, came from my own daughter, Nadia. Just a week before that fateful day, she came home from school, her brow furrowed with the earnest confusion of a 14-year-old. Her best friend, Chloe, had just lost her grandmother. Nadia had attended the church funeral to support her. Mama, she asked me as I prepared dinner. At the funeral, they talked about Chloe's grandma being in heaven with Jesus. She was such a good person, always baking cookies for the whole street. Is she in hell now just because she wasn't Muslim? I stopped chopping vegetables and turned to my daughter, my bright, compassionate Nadia. I gave her the standard, textbook answer about the necessity of believing in the one true religion for salvation. I explained that actions are judged by faith, and without the correct faith, even the best actions are invalid. But as the words left my lips, they felt like ash in my mouth. They were hollow, brittle, and utterly devoid of the mercy I claimed to worship. I saw a flicker of disappointment in my daughter's eyes before she looked away. In that moment, I felt like a fraud, defending a divine decree that my own heart could not accept. I quickly suppressed the feeling, finished making dinner, and called everyone to the table, the comforting rituals of family life once again plastering over the cracks in my soul. The morning of April 10th was disarmingly beautiful. The Scottish sky, normally a sullen canvas of gray, was a brilliant, cloudless blue. A gentle breeze rustled the new leaves on the birch trees in our garden. It felt like a gift, a sign of Allah's favor, and I remember feeling a surge of gratitude as I completed my Fajr prayer. The day ahead was a busy one, a crucial accounting meeting in Dublin that required me to drive down and catch the ferry. As I prepared breakfast, my youngest, 9-year-old Farah clung to my waist, her face buried in my side. She was usually a whirlwind of morning energy, but today she was quiet and somber. "What is it, my little dove?" I asked, stroking her hair. She looked up at me, her large brown eyes clouded with a fear that seemed too old for her years. "I had a scary dream about you, Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. "There was a loud noise like thunder but made of metal, and you were gone." A cold knot formed in my stomach, the primal fear every mother knows. I quickly pushed it down, replacing it with the armor of my faith. I hugged her tight, her small body trembling against mine, and recited the Ayat al-Kursi, the verse of the throne, over her, a powerful prayer for protection I had taught all my children. There, my love, just a silly dream," I soothed, kissing her forehead. "Allah is the best of protectors. If only I had known. If only I had understood that the protection I needed couldn't be found in memorized Arabic verses, but in a truth I was actively, arrogantly running away from." My drive began like any other. I kissed the children goodbye, gave Rizwan a quick hug, and headed out onto the D45 motorway. The Quranic recitation played softly from my car stereo, the familiar melodious verses a comforting presence. My mind was on the upcoming meeting, but also on the Ramadan preparations I was planning. I mentally ticked off a list of iftar meals I would cook, the extra prayers I would perform, the lectures I would attend. My life was a meticulously organized schedule of religious obligations, a structure that I believed gave it meaning and purpose. On the drive, I passed several churches, their stone spires reaching for the same sky I worshipped under. I looked at them with a familiar, ingrained mixture of pity and superiority. Poor, misguided people, I thought to myself. Worshipping a man as God, believing he had a son. They've corrupted their scriptures and lost the straight path. I even smiled smugly as I overtook a car with a small fish symbol on its bumper. Islam is the fastest-growing religion for a reason, I mused. Eventually, everyone will recognize its perfect, logical truth. The irony of those thoughts is so sharp now it physically hurts. I was so utterly blind, so confident in my own righteousness, driving headlong not just towards a business meeting, but towards an appointment with destiny that would obliterate everything I thought I knew about God, truth, and my own soul. The D45 motorway was surprisingly empty for a Thursday morning, a ribbon of black tarmac stretching out towards the horizon. I increased my speed slightly, feeling the hum of the engine, a comfortable and modern sound against the ancient recitation from the speakers. It was in this state of serene confidence that I first noticed the truck. It was a large, grimy flatbed, probably from a local steelworks, lumbering along in the lane ahead of me. It was carrying a heavy load of thick industrial steel pipes, their circular mouths gaping open at the sky. Something about them made me uneasy. They were bundled together with heavy-duty chains, but even from a distance, the chains looked slack, almost casually draped over the load rather than cinched down with any real tension. I remember thinking the driver was either lazy or foolish. I eased my foot off the accelerator, letting the distance between us grow. A sensible precaution, but you cannot take precautions against fate. What happened next did not unfold in slow motion. It felt as if time itself fractured into a million sharp, brilliant pieces. An invisible wall of wind slammed into the motorway from the fields to my left. It was a sudden, violent gust that made my car shudder and pressed against the side of the truck with colossal force. I heard it before I saw it, a sound I will never forget. A single high-pitched metallic snap, like the report of a rifle. It was the sound of a chain failing. Then came a deep, groaning roar as tons of steel shifted. The pipes were free. For a frozen second, they seemed to hang in the air, a chaotic sculpture of rust and metal suspended against the blue sky, catching the morning sun. Then they began to fall, tumbling end over end, bouncing off the asphalt with sickening, concussive thuds. I yanked the steering wheel, my mind screaming a single primal word: no. But there was nowhere to go. The motorway was lined with a steel guardrail, an unforgiving wall. I was trapped. The world became a kaleidoscope of shattering glass and shrieking metal. The last thing I saw with perfect, horrifying clarity was one of the pipes, immense and unstoppable, flying directly toward my windshield. There wasn't even time for a full scream. The impact was an explosion of sensory violence. Not just a sound, but a physical shockwave that felt like it tore through the very atoms of my body. The deafening crash of metal against metal was followed by the crystalline explosion of the windshield. A universe of tiny glass diamonds erupted into the car. And then the pipe. It didn't just break the glass, it punched through reality. I felt a brutal, invasive force slam into my chest, a violation so profound it stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't a sharp pain, not at first. It was a dull, crushing weight, a monstrous pressure that engulfed my entire being. I remember the coppery taste of blood filling my mouth, the gurgling sound I tried to turn into a prayer. My last conscious thought was a desperate attempt to form the words of the Shahada, the declaration of my faith. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The words dissolved into a choked whisper. My vision tunneled into a pinpoint of light. The symphony of destruction faded into a dull, distant hum, and the searing pain gave way to a vast, cold, and final silence. My heart stopped beating. Death was not a void. It was an unmooring. One moment, I was trapped inside a broken, bleeding cage of flesh and bone. The next, I was simply free. There was no tunnel of light, no choir of angels, just a silent, instantaneous shift in perception. The crushing weight, the searing pain, the taste of blood, it all vanished. I was pure consciousness, weightless and whole, floating in the air a few feet above the wreckage of my car. The sight below was grotesque, a scene of shocking carnage that should have filled me with horror, but I felt a strange and profound detachment, as if I were watching a film. I could see the mangled blue metal of my Volkswagen, twisted into an unrecognizable shape. I saw the steel pipe, a brutal spear pinning the car to the earth, its end protruding obscenely through the shattered windshield. And I saw myself, or rather the body I had just vacated. It was slumped over the steering wheel, a broken doll draped in a blood-soaked hijab. Her head was slumped at an unnatural angle, and a dark crimson stain was spreading rapidly across her chest. I watched as other cars screeched to a halt, as people emerged with horrified faces, their hands covering their mouths. I heard their distant, panicked shouts, the urgent wail of approaching sirens. I saw the paramedics arrive, their movements efficient and practiced. They swarmed the wreckage, using heavy tools to pry open the driver's side door with a screech of tortured metal. They placed a defibrillator on my chest, and I watched dispassionately as my own body convulsed with the jolt of electricity. Once or twice, they were shouting things. No pulse, massive internal bleeding, we're losing her. But they had already lost me. I was no longer in that broken vessel. I was here in this serene, silent space, an invisible observer to the frantic, futile efforts to bring me back. The terror of the crash had been replaced by a quiet curiosity. Where was I? Was this the Barzakh, the intermediary realm between death and resurrection that I had taught the children about? I waited for the angels Munkar and Nakir to appear, to begin their fearsome questioning of the grave. I waited for the darkness, the judgment, the reckoning. But none of it came. Instead, the chaotic scene below began to fade, the sounds of the sirens and the shouting voices receding as if a volume knob were being turned down. Until all that was left was a gentle, humming silence. The world I knew dissolved into a soft, gray mist, and in its place, a new reality began to dawn. It started not as a sight, but as a feeling, a warmth that began at the edges of my consciousness and slowly seeped inward, a warmth that felt like coming home. The warmth was followed by a light. It wasn't the harsh, clinical light of an operating room or the familiar light of the sun. This was a living light, a liquid gold that was simultaneously soft and overwhelmingly brilliant. It didn't just illuminate, it permeated everything, including me. I was no longer floating in a gray mist, but was suspended in an ocean of pure, unconditional love. Every doubt I ever had, every fear that had haunted me in the dead of night, every insecurity I had carried about being a good enough wife, mother, or Muslim, it was all incinerated in an instant, not by fire, but by a perfect, overwhelming acceptance. All the terror from the accident, all the confusion of my disembodied state, it all simply ceased to be. I knew, with a certainty that transcended all earthly logic, that I was in the presence of God. Then, within the heart of the light, a form began to coalesce. It was a man, yet more than a man's. His form was woven from the light itself, and a face I had never seen, yet had known for all eternity, looked upon me. He wore no crown, carried no scepter, yet I knew I was in the presence of absolute majesty. His eyes, they held the sorrow of a billion heartbreaks, and the joy of a billion answered prayers all at once. And in them I saw myself not as the pious Amina Sharif, but as a lost child who had finally found her way home. I didn't need to ask who he was. The very essence of my soul cried out his name, Jesus. The name I had been taught to respect as a prophet, but never to worship. The name I had pitied others for placing their faith in. As I stood in his presence, stripped of my pride, my piety, and my identity, he did not speak with a voice. Instead, knowledge, truth, and visions flowed directly into my consciousness. The first thing he showed me was the consequence of the choice I was about to make. The scene of the crash dissolved, and I was shown a vision of my own home. I saw my husband, Rizwan, his face contorted not with grief but with a cold, righteous fury. I heard him shouting at me, calling me a blasphemer, an apostate, a disgrace to our family. I saw him take our children, turning them away from me, their young faces a mixture of fear and confusion as he explained that their mother had been led astray by Shaitan. Then the vision shifted to my mosque, the place that had been my second home. I saw the imam, a man I deeply respected, denouncing me from the minbar, warning the congregation against my demonic delusions. I saw my friends, the women I had shared so much with, turn their faces away from me on the street as if I were a ghost. I was shown a torrent of hatred online, calls for my death in accordance with Islamic law for apostasy. It was a vision of utter desolation, of losing everything and everyone I held dear. The pain of it was so intense it felt like a second death. But then, alongside these agonizing images, Jesus showed me something else. He showed me a young Muslim man in a university library, secretly watching my future testimony on his laptop, tears streaming down his face as the doubts he had been too afraid to voice were finally answered. He showed me a mother in Iran, listening on a hidden radio, who would find the courage to teach her children about the love of Christ. He showed me countless souls, adrift in the same beautiful, intricate system of belief I had been, who would find freedom through my story. He was showing me the cost, but he was also showing me the purpose. He was asking me to trade the comfortable fortress I had built for a life on the front lines of a spiritual war I never knew existed. With the purpose of my suffering laid bare, the visions shifted from the future to the past, but it was a past I had never truly understood. Jesus began to unravel the very fabric of my identity as a Muslim, starting with the concept I held most dear, the Ummah, the global brotherhood of believers. I had always taken immense pride in belonging to this community of nearly 2 billion souls. It was a source of strength, identity, and security. But now I was shown the spiritual reality behind it. I saw the Ummah not as a beautiful tapestry of faith, but as a colossal, gilded cage. Its walls were built from a powerful, unspoken pressure to conform, and its bars were forged from the terrifying fear of exclusion. I was shown scenes from my own life, viewed now through this lens of terrifying clarity. I saw myself at a community dinner, politely shunning a young woman who had recently stopped wearing her hijab, my cold shoulder a silent but clear message: you are straying. I watched myself warning my teenage son, Hattie, about spending too much time with his Scottish school friends, telling him, "They are not our people, they will weaken your faith," effectively poisoning his natural friendships with suspicion. I witnessed a memory I had long forgotten. A young, confused teenager at the mosque had come to me with questions about science and the Quran. Instead of encouraging his curiosity, I had pressured him, warning him that such questions were a sign of weak iman and that he needed to recommit to Islam without question. I saw in that moment that I had not been a guide. I had been a jailer helping to lock the door of his mind. Jesus showed me that this intense group identity, while providing comfort and belonging, was a masterfully designed spiritual defense mechanism. It kept sincere, doubting Muslims from ever daring to look for truth outside the fortress walls, because the price of leaving, excommunication from family, friends, and one's entire social world, was simply too high for most to bear. It was a self-policing system of spiritual control. Then the vision shifted to the foundation of Islamic life, Sharia. The divine law I had meticulously followed, from the way I ate to the way I managed my finances. I had believed it was God's perfect blueprint for humanity. But I was shown that the intricate, all-encompassing nature of the law was a barrier, not a bridge to God. I saw how it kept me and millions like me focused on an endless checklist of external actions, halal and haram, permissible and forbidden, while neglecting the internal state of the soul. My adherence to Sharia had filled me with a sense of self-righteousness. I believed I was earning my way to heaven through my own diligent efforts. This, I was shown, was a dangerous falsehood. The law had become an idol, a substitute for the relationship with a loving God that my heart truly craved. The gilded cage of the Ummah kept me in line, and the endless maze of Sharia law kept me so busy trying to be righteous that I never realized I needed to be rescued. From the grand structures of community and law, the revelations then descended into the most intimate acts of my daily devotion. My 5 daily prayers, the Salah, had been the unshakable pillars of my existence. I had arranged my entire life around them, felt a deep sense of guilt if I ever missed a single one, and believed each prostration was a moment of profound connection with the Almighty. Now, in the presence of Christ, I was shown the truth behind these sacred rituals. I saw millions upon millions of Muslims around the world, including myself, bowing, kneeling, and prostrating in perfect synchronized motion. It was a powerful display of unity and discipline. But I was shown that this rigid physical choreography was a form of spiritual hypnosis. The repetitive movements, the prescribed words recited in an ancient Arabic that most, including myself, did not fully comprehend, served to lull the mind into a state of compliant tranquility, mistaking the comfort of ritual for genuine communion with God. The focus was on the perfection of the physical form, the angle of the back, the position of the hands, while the heart could remain distant, untouched. Then my attention was drawn to the Qibla, the direction of prayer towards the Kaaba in Mecca. I had always found it beautiful, this idea of a global spiritual compass, all of us turning our hearts to a single point. But Jesus revealed that this physical orientation was a profound misdirection. True worship, I was shown, is not about which direction your body faces on a map. It is about the orientation of your soul towards the living Christ. The ritual of turning towards a stone building 5 times a day had kept billions of hearts from turning towards their true Savior. The melodic recitation of the Quran, the sound I had once found so beautiful it could move me to tears, was next. I saw myself in my car, listening to the verses, feeling blessed and peaceful. But it was revealed to me that the emphasis on the musicality of the recitation in a language I couldn't speak fluently had prevented true understanding. It was an aesthetic experience, not a theological one. The beauty of the sound acted as a sedative, making me accept doctrines and commands without ever truly grappling with their meaning or implications. It was a way of venerating a book I hadn't truly read in a way I could understand. Then, in a vision that shocked me with its simplicity and power, Jesus revealed the spiritual reality of my tasbih, the string of 99 beads I used to recite the names of Allah. I saw my own hands, lovingly fingering each bead, my lips murmuring the holy attributes. I had always believed this to be a profound act of meditation and devotion. But I was shown that the beads were not aids to prayer, they were spiritual chains. Each beat I touched, each name I recited, was another link binding me to a system of repetitive formulas, keeping me from the spontaneous, intimate, conversational prayer that a child has with a loving father. I was counting out my devotion instead of pouring out my heart. The revelations then expanded, moving from the personal rituals of my daily life to the monumental pillars of Islam that unite the entire global community. The first vision was of the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. Twice I had made that journey, and both times it had been the most spiritually profound experience of my life. I remembered the sight of the Kaaba, the sea of white-clad pilgrims, the feeling of unity and devotion so thick you could almost taste it. I believed I was standing in the most sacred spot on earth, in the very presence of God's power. Now, Jesus peeled back the physical veil and showed me what was happening in the spiritual realm during the Hajj. The vision was horrifying. Instead of a holy atmosphere ascending to heaven, I saw a vortex of dark spiritual energy. I saw demonic forces feeding ravenously on the intense, raw emotions of millions of sincere, devout pilgrims. The hope, the devotion, the desperation for forgiveness, all this powerful spiritual energy was not reaching God. It was being harvested, channeled not upward but downward to maintain the power of the great deception and strengthen the spiritual fortress that held the Muslim world captive. The rituals themselves, circling the Kaaba, casting stones at pillars representing Satan, were shown to be a form of spiritual theater, keeping the pilgrims intensely focused on symbolic acts while the true spiritual battle for their souls was being lost. My cherished memories of Mecca were forever tainted, replaced by the horrifying image of sincere worshippers unknowingly powering the very system that enslaved them. From the sands of Mecca, the vision shifted to the quiet discipline of Ramadan. I had loved Ramadan. The shared hardship of the fast, the festive iftar meals at sunset, the feeling of spiritual accomplishment after a month of devotion. It forged a powerful sense of solidarity and renewed my faith each year. But I was shown that this practice, adapted from pre-existing religious traditions, had been stripped of its potential for true spiritual intimacy and repurposed as a brilliant tool of religious control. The physical ordeal of the fast, combined with the heightened sense of community, created an annual spiritual high. This powerful emotional experience served to reinforce each Muslim's attachment to Islam, making them feel closer to God while, in reality, binding them ever tighter to the religion itself. It was a yearly booster shot for the immune system of the soul, immunizing it against the true gospel. I saw how this feeling of spiritual accomplishment had filled me with pride, making me believe I was earning Allah's favor through my own endurance. It was another form of self-righteousness, another distraction that had kept me from recognizing my desperate need for a grace that could not be earned by an empty stomach. The most sacred pillars of my faith were being revealed to me as the most powerful illusions. The revelations now converged on the single most critical point of division between Islam and Christianity, the very identity of the man I now stood before. In Islam, Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus, son of Mary, is one of the most revered prophets. I had been taught to love and respect him. I defended his miraculous birth, I believed in his miracles, and I awaited his return at the end of times. My heart was, I thought, full of honor for Jesus. But this construct of respect was now revealed to be the most subtle and brilliant deception of all. Jesus showed me that every time a Muslim speaks respectfully of the Prophet Isa, while simultaneously denying his deity, denying his divine sonship, and denying his crucifixion, they are participating in a clever form of blasphemy disguised as honor. It was a spiritual sleight of hand that made Muslims feel they were aligned with Jesus, while in reality they were rejecting the three foundational truths that make him the savior of the world. I saw scenes from my own life flash before me, passionately arguing with a Christian colleague that God is one, he does not have a son, pridefully thinking I was defending the pure monotheism of Abraham. I saw myself teaching the children in my mosque class that the Christian belief in the Trinity was a corruption, a form of polytheism. Each of these moments, which I had considered acts of defending the truth, was now shown to be another brick I was personally laying in the wall separating me from salvation. Then came the most devastating revelation of all, the spiritual impact of denying the crucifixion. The Quran teaches that Jesus was not crucified, but that God made it appear so and raised him to heaven before he could die. I had always seen this as an act of God's mercy, a way of honoring his beloved prophet by saving him from such a humiliating death. But Jesus showed me that this single doctrine was the keystone of Islam's power to hold souls captive. It was a master stroke of satanic genius. By denying the cross, Islam nullifies the very mechanism of atonement. It removes the sacrificial payment for sin, leaving humanity with no choice but to try and earn their way to heaven on a scale of good versus bad deeds. A scale, I now understood, that no one could ever hope to tip in their favor. The rejection of the cross was not an act of honoring Jesus, it was an act of rendering his entire mission void. In that moment, I finally understood. The Islamic Jesus is a veiled savior, a prophet stripped of his power, a king without his throne, and a lamb without a sacrifice. He is a hollow counterfeit, designed to be just similar enough to the real Jesus to inoculate Muslims against the true gospel. To accept the Islamic Isa is to be vaccinated against the saving power of Jesus Christ. And I, in my sincerity and devotion, had been one of his most dedicated administrators. The weight of this truth was crushing, and for the first time in this realm, I felt a sorrow so profound it was a spiritual agony. The agony of that revelation was followed by a vision so personal, so deeply painful, it shattered what was left of my old self. The focus narrowed from the high peaks of theology to the intimate realities of my life as a woman and a mother. The Islamic view of women, which I had accepted and defended my entire life, was laid bare before me. I had always rationalized the restrictions. The hijab, I told myself and my daughters, was not a tool of oppression but a symbol of dignity and protection, a way to command respect by focusing on the mind, not the body. The laws that made a woman's testimony worth half a man's, I argued, were simply a recognition of our more emotional nature. I had accepted it all as part of a divine order designed for a harmonious society. Now, Jesus showed me the spiritual truth that lay beneath these justifications. He showed me that the entire system, from the rules of dress to the laws of inheritance, had been engineered to keep women in a state of spiritual, emotional, and often physical bondage. It was a system that subtly taught women from birth that they were inherently less than men in spiritual authority and worldly value. The teaching I had always tried to ignore, the hadith stating that the majority of inhabitants in hell would be women, was revealed for what it truly was. Not a divine warning, but a deliberate strategy of spiritual terrorism. It was a poison designed to create a deep-seated insecurity in the heart of every Muslim woman, making her forever anxious, forever striving, and forever dependent on the male figures in her life for spiritual validation. I then saw myself through God's eyes, and the vision broke my heart. I saw myself teaching my beautiful daughter Nadia how to wrap her hijab for the first time, telling her it was her crown of honor, when in truth I was placing a symbol of subservience upon her head. I saw myself telling my youngest, Farah, to be quiet while the men were speaking, teaching her that her voice was less important. I witnessed every time I had told my daughters that a good Muslim woman was submissive, that her ultimate purpose was to be an obedient wife and mother, effectively clipping their spiritual wings before they ever had a chance to fly. I had not been protecting them. I had not been guiding them. I had been a warden, passing on the chains of my own bondage to the next generation, ensuring the prison remained secure. The tears I cried were not tears of this world. They were tears of the soul, a torrent of grief not just for myself, but for the millions of mothers like me, sincere and loving, who were unknowingly binding their own daughters in the same invisible chains, all in the name of a God who had created them for so much more. Just as the sorrow for my daughters threatened to consume me entirely, the presence of Jesus intensified, replacing my agony with a profound and final vision of hope. He lifted my gaze from my own failures and showed me a vast, panoramic view of history, a secret history known only to God. I saw countless souls throughout the 14 centuries of Islam who had been touched by the truth of Christ. I saw a scholar in medieval Baghdad, secretly reading a smuggled copy of the Gospels by candlelight, his heart set ablaze. I saw a woman in the Ottoman court, whispering the name of Jesus in her prayers, risking everything for a faith she could not share. I saw men and women known to the world as Muslims, who had secretly come to know Christ as their Savior through dreams, visions, or a simple, unexplainable stirring in their souls. Their suffering was immense, their worship was in isolation, their faith was a terrifying secret. But in this vision, I saw that their silent prayers had been heard, their isolated worship had been seen, and their hidden faith had been honored by God as a precious treasure. They were not forgotten, they were the hidden jewels in his kingdom. Then the vision swept forward into the present day. I was shown a great spiritual awakening taking place right now across the entire Islamic world, from the villages of Indonesia to the cities of North Africa. I saw a tidal wave of dreams and visions of Jesus, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of religion and reaching people directly in the solitude of their own hearts. I saw a young man in Saudi Arabia having a recurring dream of a man in white who called himself the way, the truth, and the life. I saw a woman in Pakistan praying her salat when the face of Jesus appeared to her, radiating a love she had never known. This was not a human missionary movement. This was a divine intervention on an epic scale. It was a promise that God had not abandoned the Muslim people, that he was actively, miraculously reaching out to the very souls I had believed were beyond his reach. As this breathtaking tapestry of hidden faith unfolded before me, my time in this realm drew to a close. The vision ceased, and I was left with only the pure, undiluted presence of Jesus. A love so vast and powerful it transcended all the barriers of religion, culture, and history washed over me. It was a love that held no anger for my years of blindness, only a deep, abiding compassion. It was a love not just for me, but for Rizwan, for my children, for my sister Mina, for my entire community, for every Muslim on earth. And I understood in that final moment that this love was the key. It wasn't clever arguments or theological proofs that would break the chains of deception. It was a direct, personal encounter with the living Christ and the irresistible power of his love. My survival was not a random medical anomaly. It was part of this divine plan. I was being sent back. I was being sent back to be a voice for the voiceless, a witness to the hidden truth, a testament to the love that had saved my soul. I was being given a divine mission. The return was as jarring as the departure had been serene. One moment, I was enveloped in the boundless, golden light of Christ's love. The next, I was being sucked back through a vortex of cold darkness. The sensation was violent, like being shoved back into a suit of clothes that was far too small and drenched in ice water. The crushing weight on my chest returned. The chorus of beeping machines and urgent, muffled voices assaulted my ears, and a searing, thousand-pronged pain ignited every nerve ending in my body. Then I gasped. A ragged, desperate intake of air that felt like swallowing broken glass. My eyes fluttered open. The first thing I saw was the stark, institutional reality of a hospital room. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling were a pale, sickly imitation of the divine glory I had just witnessed, and they hummed with an irritating, monotonous buzz. My husband, Rizwan, was slumped in a chair by my bedside, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He looked up as I gasped, his face a mask of exhausted grief that instantly transformed into wide-eyed disbelief. Tears of relief streamed down his face, carving paths through the stubble on his cheeks. "Amina, alhamdulillah, you're alive," he exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion as he lunged for my hand. He squeezed it tightly, bringing it to his lips, his tears falling onto my skin. "Praise be to God, they said you were gone." The joy in his eyes was pure and overwhelming, a desperate, beautiful love from the man I had shared my life with. But looking at him, all I could feel was a profound, aching compassion. He was praising a God whose name had been used to veil the truth from him. He was celebrating my return to a world of shadows. My throat was raw, my lips were cracked, and it felt like a monumental effort to form words. But I knew what my first words had to be. They were not the Shahada, they were not alhamdulillah. With a voice that was little more than a dry, raspy whisper, I looked at my husband and said, "Jesus is Lord." The joy in Rizwan's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a deep, bewildered confusion. He let go of my hand as if it had suddenly become red-hot. "What, Amina, you're delirious, the trauma." But I just shook my head slightly, the small movement sending a fresh wave of pain through my body. The doctors and nurses rushed in, alerted by the monitors. They called my recovery miraculous. They used words like unexplainable and astounding. They spoke of the multiple, complex surgeries that had repaired the catastrophic damage to my organs, but they had no medical explanation for how I had survived being clinically dead for 15 minutes with absolutely no brain damage. But I knew the reasons. My physical body had been miraculously repaired because my spiritual journey wasn't over. It had just begun. I had not been saved from death. I had been reborn into a war. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing crawl through a battlefield of my own making. The physical pain of my recovery was immense, a constant, throbbing reminder of the accident, but it was nothing compared to the torment of my new reality. As I lay in my hospital bed, trapped in a body that felt alien, my family would visit, and each visit was a fresh agony. I would watch my children, Nadia, Hattie, and little Farah, walk in, their faces a mixture of relief and anxiety. Seeing them in their familiar Islamic clothing, hearing them pepper their speech with inshallah and mashallah, each beloved word now landed on my heart like a tiny stone, a reminder of the beautiful, intricate cage they were still living in. How could I tell them that the world I had so lovingly built for them was a lie? When I finally gathered the strength to tell Rizwan the full story of my experience, his reaction was exactly as Jesus had shown me it would be. It unfolded in predictable, heartbreaking stages. First came denial. He was convinced it was a trauma-induced hallucination, a side effect of the brain injury. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, Habibti," he said, his voice laced with a desperate, pleading pity. "You need rest, not these fantasies." When my insistence didn't waver, denial curdled into anger. He accused me of being ungrateful to Allah for saving my life, of succumbing to Western influences I had always railed against. He brought the imam from our mosque to my hospital bedside to counsel me, to pray over me, to perform what amounted to a gentle exorcism. The imam's kind, patronizing words about a confused soul were almost harder to bear than Rizwan's anger. Finally came the ultimatums. "You will renounce this blasphemy, Amina," Rizwan said, his voice cold and hard, all the warmth gone from it. "You will return to Islam or we are finished. Our marriage, our family, it will be over." My children's reactions were a fractured mirror of my own inner turmoil. Nadia, my eldest, shocked me. She confessed in a whisper when we were alone that she had been having her own doubts for years, that my words gave her a terrifying sense of hope. Hattie, my son, reacted with pure anger, parroting the anti-Christian arguments he had been taught in Islamic school, his face a mask of betrayal. And little Farah, my innocent Farah, simply broke my heart. She asked, her eyes full of tears, "Can I love both Jesus and Allah, Mama?" The wider community's response was swift and merciless. News of my apostasy spread like a virus. My employer, a firm run by devout Muslims, terminated my contract, citing unprofessional conduct after I shared my story with a concerned colleague. The mosque community, once my support system, now treated me as if I carried a plague. Old friends would cross the street to avoid me. My social media, once filled with community news and friendly messages, became a cesspool of vitriol, ranging from prayers for my re-guidance to explicit death threats. Amidst all this darkness, one fragile beam of light shone through. My sister, Mina. She was the first person who truly listened, not with judgment or pity, but with an open, searching heart. As I recounted the details of what I had seen, she wept, recognizing the answers to the questions she had been too afraid to fully ask. "I knew it," she whispered, her hand clutching mine. "I knew something was wrong." In the desolation of my old life, a single seed of a new one had just been planted. For every door that slammed shut in my face, a small, hidden one seemed to creak open. Rizwan made good on his promise. The divorce was swift and painful. I lost my home, my financial security, and most devastatingly, he was granted primary custody of the children. He saw it as his religious duty to protect them from their apostate mother. The legal system, navigating the complex cultural sensitivities, allowed him to move them to a stricter Islamic school and limit my visits. Each supervised meeting in a sterile public place was a new kind of torture, watching my own children become more distant, their eyes reflecting the mixture of fear and pity their father was teaching them. It was during this period of absolute desolation, when I had nothing left to lose, that Mina's quiet support became my lifeline. Together, we found our way to a place I never would have imagined seeking out. It wasn't a grand church with a steeple, but an unassuming house in a quiet suburb. Here, a small group of former Muslims gathered in secret every Sunday to worship Christ. Walking in that first time was terrifying, every conditioned instinct in me screaming that this was a betrayal of the highest order. But what I found inside was not a den of infidels, but a fellowship of the broken, healed by a love that had cost them everything. Their stories were echoes of my own. A man from Iran who had a vision of Jesus in a dream. A young woman from Somalia who had stumbled upon the Gospels online. A man from my own Pakistani community who had had a near-death experience years ago but had been too terrified to speak of it. We were a collection of survivors, each having walked through the fire of persecution, and in our shared testimonies I found a strength I never knew I possessed. We studied the Bible together, and for the first time I was not reading a corrupted text, but discovering the true face of the Jesus who had met me in the light. Mina was baptized alongside me a few months later, a moment of profound, tearful joy in a sea of sorrow. The hardest part was, and still is, the battle for my children's hearts. I watch Rizwan diligently fortify the same fortress of faith around them that I once maintained, and my heart aches. Yet even in this excruciating pain, I feel the unwavering presence of Christ, a peace that defies all earthly circumstance. My life is no longer the pristine, orderly garden I once cultivated. It is a messy, beautiful, and often painful journey along a new path. But it is a path of truth, a path of freedom. I was sent back with a mission, and that mission has become my life. My story is not just my own. It is for every person who has ever felt a whisper of doubt in the silence of the night, for every soul trapped in a system of belief that feels more like a prison than a refuge. It is a testament that there is a love that transcends religion, a truth that is not afraid of questions, and a Savior who is actively, miraculously reaching for you. If you've made it this far, my journey has resonated with some part of yours. I ask you not just to listen, but to participate in this mission of hope. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. Your support does more than just help a channel grow. It helps spread these life-changing truths to others who are still searching in the dark, just as I once was. Thank you for listening.